saw a hand up over there. Who had their hand up? Was it Peggy? Yeah, so Peggy, all right. So we'll come back to you, Peggy. I just want you to know, I noticed that. Congresswoman Dingell, otherwise known as Debbie to me, and Congressman Harper, thank you so much for joining us, Republican, Democrat. I just want to start out for a moment and thank you both for making this issue of the sandwich generation, long-term care, I call it the vice, important to you, but I want to know why it is. I mean, you have successfully gotten Donald Trump to sign a bipartisan bill called the RAISE Act. I don't know if he knew he signed it, but you can share that with us a little bit later. And Debbie, I know you're about to take over the Family Caregiving Caucus. So let me start with you for a moment. Why have you made this such a passion? What's your personal connection to this issue?
Well, I do have a personal connection. Everybody here probably knows the man that I'm married to, who I love with my whole heart and soul. And I'm very lucky that his brain is great, but his mobility has seriously been impacted the last few years. And you don't understand, you can have all the theoretical discussions you want about Medicare and Medicaid and health insurance until you're suddenly in the system. And it was about 4 years ago that, the story I tell when I'm talking to groups is I literally documented this. I spent 14 hours on the phone with Medicare and Blue Cross Blue Shield, just pushing buttons and trying to get through, who was the primary payer, Medicare or Blue Cross Blue Shield. And I say after 14 hours, every minute of which I can document, I finally gave up and called my congresswoman. But it's just, you suddenly enter into a bureaucracy that's unworkable. When you do become ill as a senior, you better just be sick for 90 days, because 90 days, you're off. We have no long-term system, no long-term health. Most people don't realize that Medicaid is the single biggest payer of long-term care in this country, and we're just not set up. We have a broken system, and you don't realize it until you're in it. And I'm luckier than 99 9/10 of the people in this country.
Wow, Gregg?
Well, first of all, her husband is a legend in the House, and just
he's really cool. I got to interview him on the day he became the longest-serving member of Congress ever.
It was a remarkable history. I don't know of anybody that's done more for the institution of the House than your husband, and it's a privilege for me to have the opportunity to serve with Congresswoman Dingell on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and to share those bipartisan concerns. Our story, and many of you know, is my wife and I have a 29-year-old son, Livingston is his name, who has Fragile X syndrome. And he is just a joy. If he came in here and sat down, you would want to take him home with you. He is just a joy. But we have dealt with those issues, and he is very independent in many ways, but he cannot drive. He has a part-time job, not a full-time job. He was one of the first 2 students to graduate from the Access program, special program at Mississippi State University for students with intellectual disabilities. And my mother passed away at age 91 3 years ago, and she died of cancer. So we were caring for her as well for the last 1.5 to 2 years of her life, where she needed more help. But she was strong-willed and independent, and she had worked till she was 88 years old. So we were really blessed in that regard. But it is, everybody has a story. You can't find anybody that doesn't have a caregiver's story within their family, their immediate family or their extended family. And so I think we really haven't, that's one reason we passed the RAISE Act, was I don't know that we truly
So people know,
yes.
but it's the Recognize, Assist, Include, Support, and Engage Act. So
Yes.
RAISE, just to get all those words in there.
You're nothing without an acronym
Yeah,
in Washington,
yeah.
D.C. You have to have it. But it allows us to actually finally get the full scope of what we're dealing with. You can't have the solutions that you need if you don't understand the full scope of that problem. And so I think it's amazing. That was something that had 60 outside groups that supported that legislation from AARP and beyond.
So can I be honest? So I'm very impressed you did that. I read the media about the passage of the RAISE Act and this becoming a law and the instructions to the Secretary of Health and Human Services to get a plan and an advisory board.
Yes, sir.
In most policy areas, that would look pretty weak. But what I found is overwhelming applause for what you've done, which to me was an indication of how little has been done, as opposed to how, and the fact that you did not have a spotlight earlier on this subject. And so, one, I applaud you, but and now there will be a plan. But I guess the question I have is, should our expectations now for government action and thinking through some of this go a lot higher than instructions to the Secretary of Health and Human Services to get his act together on this?
I mean, I'm sure Congresswoman Dingell has her view on it, but this is part of the way the process works sometimes. You know where you want to wind up, but you can't get there overnight.
Right.
So it's important to have this step, which had such broad bipartisan support.
Totally, yeah.
And does it solve the problems? No. But does it recognize those problems that are there and see how broad this is? As we, my wife and I have only had 29 years to figure out what to do about our son's long-term future, and we still don't know today. We just know he's happy,
Right.
and you don't mess with happy. And he's enjoying life, and he's quite a blessing. But this is something, as my wife and I get older. Well, as I get older, my wife doesn't get older, but it is something that we know we have to do something.
Yeah.
And so you see the challenges in families, and we've had friends from our church and family members that have always helped us with our son. Not every family has those personal resources, and so we just want to be in a position where we help families through this.
Debbie, so I also saw in this overwhelming support and praise for the RAISE Act, but I'm just asking, in the next steps, Congressman is leaving Congress, you're going to be staying in Congress, and you're going to have more muscle since the Democrats took over. What should be our expectations for action in the future?
Well,
Is that us? Just want to make sure. Sorry.
so kind of be the day I'm
Yeah.
having.
Did they know you're here? Okay.
there.
Oh, cool. Okay, go ahead.
Right.
There are 12, first of all, we can't do this in a partisan way. We
Right.
have to do it in a bipartisan way. And I think that John Dingell is very wise about all of this. We have 12 million Americans right now that need long-term care, and half of them are over 65, and that number is going to double. This country has got a broken long-term care system. Many people don't know the history of this, but John Dingell's father was the author of Social Security. And then after he passed Social Security, he wrote the first universal health care bill in the 40s.
So you're the daughter-in-law of Social
I'm the daughter.
Security.
Well, I don't know what I am, but
Yeah.
I know I'm living it, and I know
Yeah.
we got a broken system. But if you talk to people that are seasoned and believe in working with each other, which we both do and people do, we got the first Medicare. So his father introduced the first bill in the 40s, and he and FDR and everyone said that's too much for people to accept. You've got to build the foundation. You've got to, and the nation, when they saw how many seniors were living in total poverty, didn't know how they were going to eat, couldn't afford to go to the doctor, passed Medicare in 1965. Following that, we passed the Children's Health Insurance Bill. Again, because people worked together, saw the need, and addressed the problem. Now, we have the baby boomers are aging. 10,000 are turning 65 every day. So we got to start to talk about the issues. How are we going to fix it? And that's part of what the RAISE bill does. Frank Pallone has introduced, or not introduced, but just put out there a draft working bill on long-term care that we've got to talk about how we're going to. Medicare is not, everybody thinks Medicare is there for seniors. It's not a long-term care bill. It is does not work. And a lot of people want to age in place. It is less expensive to help them age in place. But people don't understand Medicare doesn't do anything to help you stay in place. In fact, it hurt you. We've got other programs, Follow the Money, that is trying to help people stay in place. My colleague, Rep. Guthrie, and I've got that, and we're trying to get it extended for a year. We'd like to get 5 years. We're going to introduce the Impoverished Spouse Act this week, Fred Upton and I. But we got to take baby steps. But we got to do something. We have a crisis coming in this country.
I feel it, and in the panelists we've had this morning, one of the things I've really noticed is that those people, we had someone from the National Council on Aging and the National Hispanic Council on Aging, they both got into their professions because they were trying to find resources of how to help their aging parents, and they were scrambling in that. Michelle Singletary has an incredible life story about all the things she. How do you? You just made a very important point. Until you're there, you don't know. How do you get literacy and awareness and empathy built in if you don't yet feel it? And that's got to be part of the political process of bringing other people along, other colleagues of yours. There are now tons of new members that are coming in. How do you make this a priority for them in both caucuses when they may not be in the same circumstance, where they don't have the same personal link?
Well, there's no doubt that, like we said earlier, everybody's experiencing this and trying to figure out what to do. It is a multifaceted approach. Yes, you want the government to be available where it needs to be available, but there's also, we need to remember our friends and neighbors have needs. And as neighbors who may not be facing this, if you can help and just give somebody some hours off, you've done a great thing for that family. So just think outside the box, think in that total picture of ways that we can do this. And because so many people face this, Steve, you know that it will have and has had a broad bipartisan support. We have to work through how we fund things, which is always an exciting battle and sometimes struggle for what we do. But it does require us to prioritize where we do spend our money and how we spend it. And if we can make people's lives a little better, and for me how personal this is on those with intellectual disabilities, which is what I've focused on these 10 years.
You should tell them about that program.
Yeah, when I was still practicing law right before I came to Congress, we were close geographically to our local high school, and I hired students out of the special ed department to come work part-time in my law office. When I got to D.C., there was nothing for students with intellectual disabilities to intern on Capitol Hill, regular college students, of course. And so we were fortunate to be able to start a program, and now we use George Mason University, their program called Mason Life, and these young people and what we're doing here is we're giving them an opportunity to get away from one of the things that's been a real struggle that I see out there is to eliminate paying sub-minimum wages to those under the 14C certificate. It's time to move past that where you can pay pennies on the dollar for someone who has special needs to go and work. And so we started this program. These young people come in, changes the hearts of the staffers who have maybe never been around anybody with special needs. We've now had over 170, 180 House and Senate offices, Republicans and Democrats, that have participated with these students for a semester. And when I became chairman of the Committee on House Administration in January of 17, I sat down with our staff. I said, look, we've got the money in our budget. We've got the slot. Find me the best recent graduate from George Mason, and we're going to hire them full-time. So we hired a young man with autism in March of 17. He's doing full-time work for full-time pay. He's no longer not on SSI, and it's changed his family's life. So that's the kind of thing that probably the thing I'll treasure the most from my 10 years.
Wow.
So.
I mean, I hate to be facetious about this, and you're in the GOP. I mean, that's kind of cool. You don't hear these stories often very much.
Steve, you need to get out and hang out.
Yeah, I'm all up for that. You bring a bunch of GOPers that do those kind of things, that'd be great.
It started with 5 House Republican offices, several of us who had special needs, children. Yeah. And then it's complete bipartisan deal. Everybody's in on this program.
Debbie, you've been writing so compellingly about the deficits in the social contract in this country. those people that are left behind broadly, how we haven't, we really, we talked about my interview with Joe Biden some years ago. We said the Democratic Party had become a party of snobs. And I'm wondering whether, as you've thought about the social contract and some of the things we have to do, I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Gregg, is how do you bring over your caucus in areas when there are so many other challenges to prioritize this?
Well, we got to put it in human terms.
Right.
I mean, I actually think that both parties are going to have to, I'll start with healthcare, period.
Right.
That everybody heard about people with pre-existing conditions in this election, and we got to do something that protects people with pre-existing conditions. But I think one of the things that's happened in the last couple of decades is more women have gone into the workforce out of sheer economic need. Mm-hmm. And as there are more women, men are starting to pick up more of the role, but women tend to be that we do it all. I remember a couple of years ago, I was late for something because I had about 80, nobody else does the laundry or the grocery shopping or the cooking, or, people look at that tough woman, she does that. Well, yeah, there's nobody else to do it. And, but we've started to, bosses, employers, know that women can multitask.
Right.
And so, we're talking long-term care, and his son's older, but, a lot of women have children. And how are we going to take care of child care? That's the squeezing, that sandwich generation that we're talking about. So employers are trying to think of policies that'll help give employees more flexibility in the workplace, which there are things that don't cost money. How do you do on-site child care? How do you help, when you look at benefits packages, do you subsidize child care? And now you're starting to see some companies talk about subsidizing senior care. It's, do we set up, I'm fortunate that we don't need this, but there are agencies that are doing things like, in Michigan, we have the Brown Center, which has daycare for Alzheimer's patients. We've got to share best practices across the country, and it's going to be more and more, the strength of democracy is communities. And as we talk about child care, senior care, how do, there are people mothers that may be at home that can maybe during the day go visit somebody or help make a meal for someone. We got to think community-based.
I want to go to the audience in just a moment, but that's wonderful. Gregg, let me ask you a question.
Yes.
As you hear the policy opportunities or policy horizon that Debbie's just described, what would you say if you had a Venn diagram as the overlay between what she thinks we need and what you think your caucus can partner in?
There are some issues that should not be bipartisan, they should be nonpartisan.
Right.
And I think this is one of those issues that I think both parties clearly recognize, because every family, both parties experience these same things in different levels, whether it's a spouse or a parent or a child that can't live completely independently. So everybody has these. The important thing to do, Steve, is let's not use this in future Congresses as a political weapon. Let's understand it as a real life.
Is there a risk of that?
There is always a risk of that. It's the nature of the beast sometimes. But this is something that if you just can visit, we do that in the South, we visit. If you can just do that, then you're in a good place to do that. Just have those discussions off camera, off the record, and just do these things that need to be done and come up with that path. That's one reason that the RAISE Act is an important first step. It's not a final step, but it's a good first step to understand this is a national problem and we need a nonpartisan solution.
Well, I happen to know the Secretary of Health and Human Services, so I plan in my next interview of him to make this question one of saying, okay, where is he now on your act? So that'd be fun. Let me go to all of you and the questions. Wow, all sorts of hands. Wow. So they're going to make these quick lightning round because there are many of you. So Peggy, fast, and we'll do quick responses. Peggy Orchowski. They're not going to give you the mic, Peggy.
Thank you.
Oh.
Not sure I can make this fast. But
It's got to be fast. It really has to be fast.
I don't know if you've ever heard of alienation. This is the other side of this, where, and I'm suffering this right now, where for over 2 years I have not been allowed to see my grandchildren or have any relations with them at all. And it's a global problem, but particularly in the United States, there's millions of parents. So make a long story short, I'm working on all angles of this as a journalist, trying to get it known. It's almost always the daughter-in-law, unfortunately.
Okay,
one
so let me get them to respond. I beg, we got to go through 5 questions here.
Here's the question. One angle is that grandparents have absolutely no rights for anything. So I want to ask you about, I've talked to the Committee on Aging about this.
Okay, grandparents' rights, alienation. Greg?
You'd have to understand my late mother's side of the family. We understand this issue very well. When she and her brother didn't speak to each other for about 5 years, because they had a falling out after my grandfather passed away. And I finally just said, enough is enough. I called my cousin, the daughter of her brother that would not, they wouldn't speak to each other, said, we're coming to Alabama to see you this weekend. Have him ready. And they were forced to speak to each other by their children. And then they were just dear friends. They forgave each other. And so you have to understand that no government, I guess a judge can do it, but somewhere in there has to be forgiveness and reconciliation, and you have to just figure out a way to love on those grandkids.
Let's go right here. Quick question.
Yes, hi. I'm Bill Owen from Knoxville, Tennessee. Off and on, a long-time Atlantic subscriber for the past 50 years. Not affiliated with any group, but I heard about this and came in. Thank you. Debbie talked about age in place. What are we doing are we doing anything to give tax credits or any kind of assistance for aging in place? And secondly, the immigration or the population is going to be by 2050 heavily over 65. Immigration could solve that problem. Are we doing anything on immigration?
So, Debbie, two
Well,
big ones.
I'll go to this last. We've needed comprehensive immigration reform forever, and I'm hoping that maybe in this next Congress, which I will miss Gregg terribly in, that we
I'll
can
write to you.
do comprehensive immigration reform to help fill some of the jobs that there are holes in. We need to be looking at all kinds of, I think that we all are recognizing with 10,000 baby boomers turning 65 every year, that we've got a problem. And there are many of us trying to study long-term care issues, and tax policy is a part of that. So, yeah.
I would say if you're really interested in that, AARP is doing a lot of work on aging in place in the various, not only federal policies, but what's going on state and local level.
Yep.
And it's
that
the wish,
I've been involved
the
with.
wish
So,
of every person to be able to do that.
right.
And they want
And what's interesting is you go a step further beyond policies, then they have a thing about design. I mean, the cool part of it for me is design and the infrastructure and how you'd begin changing things so that it's actually age-friendly, which many places are
Many
not
cities
today.
are starting, many
Yeah.
cities and towns are
Exactly.
looking at how do you make us they're more senior friendly.
Let's go here right in the middle row next to Peggy. Thank you guys for all being brief. I like lightning rounds. You get more done.
Whoops, pardon me.
Don't fall.
Yeah.
What is being done to really support more local activity? I happen to live in a county that when my father came to visit us at 95 and we realized he needed to stay, it was very easy to get him into daycare, but I also realized we have affordable housing in the county in which I live, and many multi-generational families need assistance with housing. So what are we doing at the national level to support local initiatives?
Great. Thoughts on this?
I'm going to let you answer it
Greg?
since
Okay.
it's your administration.
But you're about to own it. You're about to own it.
And
We're
did
gonna
Donald
work
Trump
on
know
it.
he was signing your
That's
bill?
it. That's it. Of course.
Okay, good. Well, I mean,
Of course.
just
And I have the
yeah.
pen.
Okay,
So-
good. That's great.
Or a pen. I don't know
Yeah.
if it's the pen or not. But no, look, this is one reason we're looking at what the total spectrum is, what we can do, and you have to look at resources that are there. There are a lot of resources available outside of the government. Many churches have phenomenal senior programs to reach out, whether it's that daycare program for seniors and community involvement there. So it's not just going to be solved by any one entity. It's going to take that global approach.
Well, there's also a kind of show and tell that churches do, communities do, city mayors do, that come in and kind of look at these programs, and what you do is see somebody that innovates in one place show it, and then you'll begin to see it replicated. We have at the Atlantic City Lab, and this is a very big priority
Steve,
of that.
one reason university towns have become so popular, they're the best for seniors.
Right.
There's always something going on
Culture,
as they go through
seminars.
that.
And
Debbie?
we need to raise awareness at the local level. We need to have advocates that look at what the different programs have. So for instance, the Brown Center, which is the Jewish Community Center that's got the model program. So
right.
it's local activists raising the issue and holding your local, county, state governments.
Serving.
And serving. And
Right.
serving.
Right. Yes, in the very back.
Hi, Bill Arnone from the National Academy of Social Insurance. What do you think of proposals that would let younger people access Social Security at earlier ages to pay for caregiving in return for delaying their Social Security retirement benefit down the road?
We'll give that one to Debbie.
You know, we're looking at everything that's on the table. I'm meeting with all of the groups right now. I'm co-chair. This is where we have the Expand Social Security, and I'm co-chair of Medicare for All, the caucuses. And we're just meeting with what are the costs? What
You
are
guys
the
were getting along so
implications?
well until that moment.
I know. So I
Oh, we're
said-
still getting along.
We are, because you got to look at options. You got to understand the costs. You got to understand the implications, and you got to think out of the box. That's thinking out of the box.
Ladies and gentlemen, big round of applause for Congressman Gregg Harper, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell. Thank you so much for your insights, and thank you for your service, and congratulations on freedom.
Thank you.
That you just got. Now, I know you're not going to be back, but
No,
I look forward to having you back.
I will never retire, Steve, because my wife works me harder than any employer I've ever had.
That's
So I'll have
great.
to have
Excellent.
jobs.
Thank you so much. Let's go this way.
Thanks.